On this episode of A State of Control, we talk about how to choose the proper solution, whether it's for your own needs or for your client's needs, how to choose between control platforms, how to weigh cost, standardization, scalability, and programming method. All that and more on A State of Control.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
A State of Control.
A State of Control, episode 41, Simplicate, not Technicate.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by HD Base T.
Welcome to A State of Control, an AVNation podcast that highlights the control programming and automation aspects of the audiovisual industry. I'm your host, Steve Greenblatt. Thanks for joining us. We have a great show planned for you today, and an episode that I think everybody can relate to. What we're going to talk about is how to figure out the appropriate solution either for your own needs or for your client's needs. And I think that we're going to specify that we're going to talk mostly about the control side, but I'm sure other parts of the industry will come into play as well. So with me to discuss such a great topic are some old friends. One is our favorite uncle, Rich Fregosa. How are you today, Rich?
One particularly old friend is what you were about to say, right?
No. I didn't mean old in the matter of age. I meant...
It's good to see you. We'll just stop there, Steve. We're good. Good to see you guys. Mellow West Coast greetings. Glad to have a full house, it looks like. So, this is always a conversation that winds up being near and dear to my heart.
Excellent. And next, someone who's getting to be a regular on the show. His name is Dave Hatch from AVI Systems. How are you, Dave? Thanks for joining us.
No, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Steve. It's sort of like Rich said, this is a discussion that I love to have.
Very nice. And last but not least, a regular on some other AVNation shows, but his first time on A State of Control. He's Mike Tomei from Tomei AV Consulting. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks. Glad to be here.
Thanks. So one of the things that I've been questioned about for many years is probably the most frequently asked question that I've received is which control system is better? And we're always reluctant to answer that question for different reasons. And there used to only be two that really were to choose from. But these days we've seen many control solutions pop up on the horizon, and a lot of different manufacturers offering control as an add-on to their flagship products. So, Rich, I'll start with you since you and I probably have been answering this for many years. And I'm not going to put you on the spot, but how do you go about answering a question like that? And how do you help somebody determine what is the right solution for them from a control standpoint?
A big part of the control solution conversation always goes back to use case. It winds up being a matter of what has the client seen? Has the client had previous experience with the control system before? Have they had a good previous experience with the control system before? You start checking off those boxes, and then from then you start taking a look at what is it that they have that's a need versus a want. Their lifestyle choices. And again, this is speaking strictly towards residential in this case, and in commercial it's completely different. In enterprise and education, those are completely different viewpoints. You might not necessarily have a 3-bidder situation or a spec or something being put out, but in the residential world, it comes back to use case. And where they see where we're able to have a conversation to find out where they see themselves living in their house and how they see themselves living in their house. Some systems are going to be better suited to certain lifestyle types, to certain square footages in a residence. Some systems are going to be better suited to a multiple of subsystems, as opposed to maybe they just want some background music and to turn a couple of lights on and off. That the list is very wide when you start out, for some of the basics. I mean, every system out there will have some form of audio interface, a video interface, a basic lighting interface. All of them are roughly going to have the same type of human interface choices, you know, a remote control, a touch panel, a tablet, a smartphone, what have you. And then you start moving into the next layers. Okay, well, what about you know, heating and air conditioning? You know, is it a simple thermostat system, or are you talking about a building management system in a residential application? You know, do you have, you know, 8 rooms and maybe 3 lighting loads in a room, or do you have 400 loads, you know, or 500 lighting loads and outer pavilions and guest houses and gyms and, you know, buildings, and all of a sudden that very much starts creating the conversation of, okay, we've now just left the area of maybe a configurable solution. Now we're moving into the area of a custom solution. And so really that is where we find where the control systems start to kind of shake out. When you start, what do we call the kind of the Panda Express version, you know, right? It's you know, if you want Kung Pao and you like Kung Pao, we're going to make sure you get Kung Pao. But if you want something off the menu, it's not going to work here. And that's where our conversation always starts, is bridging that gap onto what they're actually going to use, as opposed to what looks really good on a spec sheet.
So, Dave, I'll turn this to you to look at it from the other side. Rich talks mostly from the residential side, but I think a lot of the things that he said do apply to the commercial business. But you're mostly on the commercial side of things. Is that conversation any easier, or is this question easier to answer?
I don't know that it is easier. You know, on the commercial side, the one thing we get more of the, you know, potentially the repeat business, where a customer, you know, has a number of rooms and then they build out for another location or for more of their location. And so, you know, there's times where the conversation many times isn't which one, you know, is the one I've got the best. It's, okay, I've got this, I've had pains, these are where I'm having trouble. Where do I go from here? Can we improve upon those with what I've got, or should I consider something else? And that's the point where this type of a discussion really often comes up. But, you know, Rich pointed out, you know, going to the use cases, and that's, you know, whether it's residential or commercial, at the end of the day, making sure that we understand what our clients need, and then deciding and helping them decide what delivers that solution is what it's all about. You know, it's finding out in the commercial side, it's the same things Rich was saying. Sure, we're not necessarily talking about the lighting loads in the guest houses, but we're still talking about the scale of what we're trying to deliver. Are we creating individual rooms that are one-offs? They have no connection to anything else? Or are we creating a template that room gets applied to many other use cases as well, even though it's just one use case at a time? Are we monitoring it? Are we providing a holistic, you know, solution to the customer? That starts to scale it out. And again, each of those lend themselves to different manufacturers or different technologies. But before you can start talking about what boxes, what widgets, what gadgets, you've got to understand what the end user is trying to achieve at the end. And then you can help drive them to whatever your experience brings you in to say that that's the best solution for them.
So, Mike, as the AV consultant who's on our panel today, and as somebody who can provide a little bit of a different perspective, both Dave and Rich and I come more from the programming side, where we're given some specs and some designs to work with, although we do have some influence and say, we don't really get to always have those upfront conversations. How do those conversations go? And how can you remain objective when you're talking about providing the options and laying out what a client can have?
Yeah, so for those of you that I haven't really met before, my background is really higher ed. So I've worked in higher ed tech support for many years. Before I started my own consulting firm, I worked at Ithaca College and Harvard University, doing tech support work in the AV department there. So a lot of what I talk about is kind of a higher ed twist, because naturally when I started my consulting firm, a lot of my clients, first clients here, are higher ed clients. So it's funny, we have like a residential, corporate, academic all represented here. So this is a pretty good mix. Yeah, I mean, just the whole topic here, I think the way I approach this is I kind of look at what's the organization's overall goals. In higher ed, AV departments typically fall into the IT world, underneath the IT umbrella. So a lot of times what their goals are things like standardization. Remote management is really big these days with IT departments, and AV is getting sucked right into remote management. And then scalability is really big too. In the higher ed world, I still seem to run across the same control companies popping up. Higher ed isn't really on the bleeding edge of adopting new technology. So, your Crestron, Extron control systems are still prevalent there. And some of the, maybe some of the smaller, cheaper systems are here and there. But really, so the way I approach it is that I kind of look at their overall organizational goals and then try to fold into those. So I'm not going to be speccing something that is extremely difficult to program, because a lot of times these higher ed clients are looking to standardize across the board with 200, 300 classrooms. And they, as a general rule, a lot of them are they can't afford to spend a lot of money on programming when you're looking at that many rooms. So we need some sort of system that's easy enough to program, maybe do it in-house for small changes, or work with integrators or independent programmers to develop some sort of standardized programming model, so it can be pumped out to a lot of rooms. So control systems or AV systems that fall under that type of umbrella are really appealing to higher ed AV departments. And scalability is really big too. We don't want to start mixing and matching all these different control systems, because one is really great with small huddle spaces, but they cannot compete in the larger lecture halls or theaters. We really like one company that can kind of span all of those different spaces, so they can go into the huddle space, have a nice small system, go into the lecture hall, have a nice beefy system, and we can stick with one company that can be remotely managed. Really is the key these days. IT people for years have been pushing remote management, and AV is now falling under that. So these systems that really play into that are very appealing for a higher ed AV. So that's my approach.
Thank you. Yeah. So Rich, we're as we're talking about standardization, and as we're talking about scalability, those things don't necessarily apply as much to the residential side. And I know that both markets are really facing the fact that clients are becoming more hands-on. They're wanting to understand these systems, and they also have the ability to create their own functionality with off-the-shelf products. So how do those things kind of figure into the mix when we're trying to help them, and they kind of have their own ideas? And how do you kind of bring them around to make them understand what is going to work, what is a good idea, what isn't, without ruffling feathers?
It's constantly the could you do it versus should you do it. I think that in any case, whether you're in residential, commercial, higher ed, the people that we're dealing with are very intelligent people. I mean, they're successful people. They wouldn't be in their position if they weren't intelligent and capable of grasping lots of concepts and being able to learn and move on. So I make no mistake in that my clients couldn't, if they wanted to apply themselves, do a lot of the basic things that we do. I mean, it's the nature, especially in Silicon Valley. A lot of them are writing software that does far more than we do in the first place. I mean, they could have done some of the stuff that we do in their grad programs if they wanted to. So our feeling has always broken down to, we've always broken it down to, what is your time worth? What is your peace of mind worth? It's the value proposition. If this is your hobby, if this is something that you would look forward to doing when you got home after a long day at work, And if you don't want to spend time with your kids, or you don't have kids, or you don't want to spend time with your animals, or your cat doesn't jump on your shoulder, then this is something that let's find something that may be a little bit more flexible, or that you can get your feet wet with it. Typically, when we have that conversation with clients and we give them the opportunity to say, you can drink from the fire hose, I'll let you do it. I'm not stopping you. I'm just here to advise you. Once we start having the conversation, we start breaking out what it really requires. They kind of back off a little bit and go, I kind of like being taken care of. It becomes the conversation again, which is, I know Mike was talking about, in higher ed, there is a lot of instance where, you can't do things in-house. You're going to have students, you're going to have people who are part of that program, and they may be, they may be transitory. They may not be permanent fixtures in the school, but it is something that winds up traditionally being taken over by different people. That's far different than a house necessarily. You're not going to get people who are going to be cycling through every 4 years in a house. So our conversation always comes back to, I can sit with a client and go, I pretty much know what you make an hour. I don't know if you really want to be spending that time doing simple things over here when you could be doing something far more productive, and we can give you some of the tools. And typically that's when we break out some of the tools, which is like, okay, here are some of the simple functions. Here are some of the scheduling functions, the alarm clock function. If, you want to be able to type in that you want to wake up to this Pandora station today and then change it to that Pandora station tomorrow, no problem. That's fully available. We have this ready for you. If you want to wake up to Sirius one day and Pandora the next, here are the tools that get you. And again, we keep going back to use case. How are you living? And I think at times, because many of us come from the technical side of things, we tend to over-technify. I'm going to make up a word right now. We're going to over-technify the process. And we start losing sight of really the end game, which is, and Dave spoke to it, and we all spoke to it. I mean, we talked, like I said, I kind of banged my shoe on the table the entire time about it, which is, warmer, cooler, brighter, dimmer, louder, softer, on and off. Those are the key principles of any interaction. Anything beyond that is fluff. That's that secondary layer that you're looking at. And so we start there, and we kind of keep building with clients, and it's listening and it's educating them on the process. And that's what we are, in this case, when we educate to not over technicate.
So Dave, I'll jump over to you, and you mentioned a lot of great criteria when you responded to the previous question, and just following up on some of the things that Rich is saying, when you're working with a client and they have specific requests, and those things, and maybe it's to try a new system, maybe it's that they think something is a cool product, or maybe it is a particular manufacturer that is catching their eye. How do you kind of bring everything back to the fact that you need to make it work, and you need to have confidence that what needs to be done can be done?
Well, I mean, it's a total balancing act, and there's no one answer to it. It all starts with the relationship that you have with the end user, or with the decision maker, whoever you're working with, and having the open line of communication so that you have the opportunity to express concerns you have, to express limits. At the end of the day, often we're given, the hardware selection, and it's make it work. And so, early on in the process, communicating, here's where, taking your vision into account, here's the solution that I think I can deliver to you. How does that fit? That might not hit everything that you're looking to, but having that dialogue of, here's the design, here's the graphic layouts of the interface, or here's the flow of the programming or the interaction that you're going to have. Here's how I'm delivering that experience. If you can have that communication with the end user before you get in the trenches and start writing code, and that, it makes it so much easier, because now you can have the discussion of, here's the line that I can't cross. I can't get past this hurdle, but I can get right up to it. And maybe my approach to get up to the line isn't quite the same as what the end user would think, but we can talk it out before it costs us tens and 20 and hundreds of hours of extra programming to not overcomplicate it. I think at the end of the day, though, it's being honest with yourself on what it's going to take to overcome something and what you think you can commit to. I'm a firm believer that if I tell an end user I'm going to do something, I'm going to find a way to do it. And it's shame on me for over committing to it if I overcommit. But let's talk it through before we get to that point. Let's make sure that we have a clear scope before we start writing the lines of code, because it's a lot less expensive for us to debate the options and to look, and maybe we can change the design, maybe we can't. But let's expose what it's going to take and where we think we're going to get to, and make sure that the client is on the same page before we start it.
So, Mike, I'll kind of jump over to you and following up on what Dave said and what you said earlier in terms of the different criteria. Cost, obviously, ability to make changes on your own. A couple of things that I noted, and consistency and flexibility and scalability. What's a priority order? and I know it varies per client. And one of the things that I would also recommend is, what is somebody comfortable with? And that a lot of times it dictates how successful the project's going to be. How do you approach things in that manner, and having the conversation, and also knowing that after you design a system, you have to rely on others to actually make it work?
Yeah, right. So, I think a lot of the projects will start out with cost being the first factor. That's where everybody goes to. When somebody submits a proposal, usually you flip right to the back page and look at the bottom line and see how much it costs, right? But I feel like in higher ed, obviously budgets can be tight, and these kind of brick and mortar colleges are trying to compete with online universities, so and they have a lot more overhead, so money can be tight. But I feel like those clients will pay for quality products as long as you can make the case for them. So they might come to you and say, well, this switcher is dirt cheap, and I found it online on this consumer site, and let's go with that one. And if you can make a good case for why that's going to fail on them, why they're going to be pulling their hair out and not kicking themselves for not having spent a little bit more money on a good solution, I feel like most of the time they listen, and the money can be found. So I think Dave had a really good point, is like this, the needs analysis phase is so important. And Dave works for a great firm, but I have dealt with other smaller, not necessarily smaller, but more disorganized integrators, I'll say that, where they might put a good bit of time into the needs analysis process, but programming really doesn't come up with them during that process. And then all of a sudden, programming is like a last-minute scramble. And the first time the client is seeing their user interfaces is when it gets installed in the field. And we have 1 week until classes start, or 2 days until classes start. And then all of a sudden they're wanting sweeping changes to these things. So I feel like, putting a lot more emphasis on the needs analysis phase really squashes a lot of those problems. From my standpoint, being a consultant, I write a pretty strict submittal process into my request for proposals that I'm sending out. And it's nothing that is hard to abide by, but I really put hard dates on when we need the integrator or the independent programmer to send over not only screenshots of user interfaces, but also like functional narrative descriptions of their programming. So we can review them. I ask that programmers put the program on a remote processor so the client can go in and start clicking buttons and start flipping pages and see what it's like well ahead of time, so that nobody's surprised when everything gets installed, and then we're only making tiny little tweaks maybe to fix something rather than these sweeping changes. So
it all comes back to that experience. You're making sure that the integrator is delivering the experience that the end user expects.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and you know, I feel like programming is still sometimes an afterthought with the smaller or more disorganized integrators that are trying to do it in-house. You know, it's great that they have somebody in-house that's doing it, but yeah, sometimes it's such an afterthought, and we're getting right down to crunch time, and we're just seeing, you know, screenshots for the first time a week before the system's going in the room. So yeah, it's tough.
Dave, I'll let you kind of follow up with that. As an integrator and as somebody who has a programming team, how do you help to alleviate those types of issues? And I know that we've discussed in past shows scope of work, processes, and so forth, but the programming still sometimes doesn't get elevated to the point that it does, even though it does contribute to what the customer client experiences or the user experiences.
Well, I mean, and it really comes to you. I mean, you can have the process in place, but you know, like Mike said, you know, timelines slide, and all of a sudden, you know, if I don't believe in the process, I'm letting it just fall short because everything is starting to get sacrificed, and so yeah, that process it's not that important. We'll just let it slide, and I'll make do. You really have to believe in the process as the programmer, as the integrator. And if you do, you make time for it. Sure, you might need to expedite the review. You might need to expedite the level of detail even, but you're still doing it. And at the end of the day, you know, from the programmer's perspective, from the integrator's perspective, it's a lot less expensive to make a change before you've written the code. And, you know, think of it from the business side of, you know, of your company. If you can catch a problem and change direction before you've done all of the work, at least, it's costing you less at the end of the day. Your company's making more money, and you're having less hassle. You're pulling less hair out. And so, you know, it really comes down to that communication, that making sure that you understand and that you're driving to understand what the end user's expectations are. And again, the use case. If you can understand where they're coming from, what they really want to get out of this at the end, it lets you more effectively deliver, you know, what will get them to that point. Because if you think about it, almost, you know, none of us as programmers want to deliver something that doesn't get used. We don't want to deliver something that the customer comes back and says is too complex or doesn't fit their needs. We want to give them exactly what they want. But that doesn't just come because we decide for them what they want. We have to, you know, we have to work with them to get as clear of an understanding as we can. And some customers, don't get me wrong, you know, some customers can't articulate. And so we have to see through the little nuggets of information they do give us. We have to see through that and then put our experience to work to do the best we can to deliver what we think they're looking for.
Well, Rich, I'll kind of jump over to you because I know that you have a lot that you could share on the processes and scopes, and we've talked about this considerably. But I'm gonna take it a little bit deeper, and we'll see if this opens up a can of worms. But when you're looking at trying to deliver a system that you feel is going to satisfy the client's needs, be what, you know, the topic that we're discussing, give them the proper solution, but yet the equipment doesn't support what you're trying to do. How far down the road do you go to make that work? And when is it time to say we have to strike a balance between what we can do in programming and what we can overcome versus what needs to be really looked at from a different angle?
Well, I've got to say that over the years I've been very fortunate. I think I've gone out of my way to make sure that all the integrators that I work with, I'm in partnership with. I'm an advisor to them just as much as I'm an advisor to the end user. And so a lot of times when we're starting out on a project, and again, you know, Mike said that there's some integrators that are impeccably organized. There's some that aren't necessarily organized, or they're young companies. And it's, you know, they're at the point where they don't know what they don't know yet. That's kind of my sweet spot. I tend to work with those companies a lot, who are smaller companies who are, you know, undermanned, you know, a lot of times. So they don't have necessarily the time to do the full documentation package. They don't have the time to do, you know, the spec, the narrative, all of the things that they do. So I literally jump in as kind of their de facto project engineer at times, and step them through that process. And it's much like you deal with a client in that when we start out, sometimes I literally just get an Excel spreadsheet. It's just an equipment list. And we start out, and I'm thankful for that, because at the very least, I can sit there and tell them, hey, you know what? We've worked with these units before. Here are some of the things that are issues with them, and we've seen them happen in the field. Now, if you're doing it because it's your product line or because the client wanted X, Y, or Z, that's great. We then immediately start putting it out. Like, we have a document, and when we're doing work for anybody, we issue a document which is, here's what we're doing. And again, it is that narrative. You're going to have this room, you're going to have an audio video processor. This processor, we're going to be able to give you this, this, and this. By the way, you're not going to get this. And it's there, and there's a little initial right next to it that says, hey, remember that time when we told you that this thing doesn't spit back volume the way that you want, because for whatever reason, it's you can't control it the way that we were looking to do it. It's already known at that point, and then we move on. But it's much like, I'll give you a plug here, Steve, is that what you and Mark Levesque are doing is like, when you sit with technology managers, it is a constant education process. And as the system programmers, which is who we're speaking to right now, whether you're an independent, whether you're a consultant, whether, you're a programming house or you're working for an integrator, we have to push ourselves into the conversation more often than not. If we wait for the conversation to come to us, it's not going to happen, because there's so many other things that are going on in a project. And I've spoken to this so many times, is as an industry, we have to get over that inferiority complex where we just kind of take it and kind of go, because we're nice guys for the most part. It's like, okay, great, got to get the job done. I'm the last guy in line. Basically, many of us have made careers on driving this thing home when nobody else could. It's part of the nature of what we do. Could it be better? Absolutely. But there's also the reality of, this is what happens a lot of times in projects. We'd like for it to be better, but a brother's still got to eat. So, I'm going to put up with it because I still got to get paid. These kaleidoscopes behind me ain't cheap. So, it becomes a matter of constantly, from your business philosophy and your personal philosophy standpoint, pushing the collaborative effort, being a partner, being a resource, bringing up the opinion, even when, and then, my background was I've been everything from an integrator to, we had a very large consulting company. I've written those specs with the system is 95% complete, and that little extra bit of consultant speak, which is like, yeah, everybody else figured it out, but we're good right now. It's a matter of us as an industry working with our peers, whether it's in your company or whether it's somebody who's provided the spec or the integrator, whoever it is, and making sure that, if you know something, you got to speak up. And that's a big part of it. And it can be done in a non-threatening way and in a productive way. And here comes my West Coast vibes, in a holistic way to kind of get everybody's chakras all lined up. But yeah, no, again, it's this business can be simple if you let it be. I really believe that. I think we sometimes get lost in the stuff that we forget that we're still dealing with people each and every time, and focus with that and being helpful and, do good things, and good things happen to you.
So Mike, I'll kind of go over to you to get your comment on what Rich is saying in terms of that collaborative effort and the ability for a programmer to get involved and either support you or the client, or also be able to have a voice earlier on in a project. Is that something that can happen? And are there any reasons why that wouldn't be a positive?
No, it's definitely a positive. So, right, I try to get programmers involved as early as I can. With my projects, once we have an integrator on board, and if the integrator is doing the programming also, I get that programmer involved right away and try to get them in talking to the clients and myself, and get that process started right away. It's I'm sure it's a little more difficult for those of you that do independent programming if you are working with integrators that might also do programming. Maybe there's a little headbutting going on, but so maybe it's a little bit easier for myself because I'm more of a third party to it, and to kind of coordinate all of that. But yeah, I try to get programmers involved early, because back when I was on the client side of things, I've been on the losing end of that stick where we wait too long, and then everything is a rush and a big crunch. So definitely try to get them involved early. And then kind of talking about what we've been talking about for a few minutes here is higher ed is kind of famous for the old owner furnished equipment, or most of the rooms that we're dealing with these days are system upgrades or renovations. It's rare that we come upon a room that just has nothing in it and is a clean slate. Clients are always making a push to reuse some piece of equipment that's in the room because they feel it's going to work out. So I still have that kind of headbutting with the clients sometimes, where I need to plead my case. They look at the bottom line. They might want to push some of their owner furnished equipment. So I still deal with that, but I feel like if I make my case and they still really want to go down a certain road, life's too short. You just got to go move on, and make your argument, document your argument. That's always a good way to do it, so that if things come back in the end and there's some sort of trouble, it's at least you have a little bit of a safety net there. It's just a fact of the matter that has to happen, but happens pretty often in the higher ed world. So, and especially because in higher ed we have tech support departments, whereas if you're doing residential, you might not have anybody on the residential side that has any tech background. So, which is a whole different, can of worms in itself. But with the AV or IT tech support departments, there's a lot of opinions that go around from every angle. So sometimes I feel like I'm on the firing range when we have those meetings with all the different in-house techs there. So interesting dynamic.
Well, I'll just follow that up with how do you deal with when there's existing standards, and this isn't necessarily a limited to education. It could be corporate as well, and you don't necessarily believe in them, because similar to using owner furnished equipment, or the existing standards may or may not be able to accomplish what it is that you feel is in line with what you identified or the client's goals.
Yeah. So, right. So that's always a tough one. And higher ed is one of those fields that's famous for having all their standards. And so I think you just have to stay flexible. There's going to be a certain point where if you absolutely do not agree with those standards, then you just need to plead your case for why they need to be changed and provide the information. I think that it's nice being a consultant because I am a good third party. I can walk into a situation and say, well, you may have been doing it for these years this way, but let me let you know what all of your peers are doing in other institutions. And I feel like people really appreciate that information if it's presented in a constructive way. Look at the amount of people going to shows like Infocom. They want to see what others are doing. And so I feel like I'm in a nice position to recommend changes. But I still stay flexible too, because I was on that flip side where I put together my standards. And when somebody would come in and say, no, we're going to change all of this. And I had to sit there and, plead my case to them, and I'm paying them to do the work. It was like odd dynamic. So I try to remember my days back on the client side of things when I'm in those situations.
Yeah, I think you have to pick your battles, and you have to understand where your client is coming from, because if, like you say, if you're being paid to come in and make changes or implement one room, and there's a standard of 500 rooms already deployed that match that to a T, it's probably not the right battle to be picking, to be saying, no, I've got a better way. Mm-hmm. At the same time, using your relationship with the client, and when they start saying, yeah, if you're testing out the system even, and they're saying, I wish this could be better. Well, next time you might consider that this would be another way to not replace your standard, but to adapt it. because that's the thing with standards is, they can change over time. They can move, they can shift. And so, we've been successful in, and again, elevating that conversation to what's the use case? What are they trying to achieve in the space, and making sure that the standard now and in the future delivers on that. And if it doesn't, well, bring your recommendations back to how can a change better deliver that use case, better deliver the experience they're looking for, rather than just, I know better. I know another way and you should use my way.
And I feel like sometimes clients really appreciate a lot more when I focus on helping them with their standards versus just that little one-off room that we're going to do and then I'm going to hit the road and that's the end of the project. I think they really appreciate that. So once you start diving into, okay, well, why do you have these standards? Maybe I can recommend some changes, this and that. I feel like they appreciate it. So
it's the difference in being a partner and just, a contractor.
Yeah, right. The old trunk slammer. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think that's a good way to wrap things up. And I think this is a good, lively topic. I think the idea that we're all trying to produce something that we know that the client is going to be happy with, that we are trying to be on their team and doing this rather than working against them, I think is the point that we really want everybody to understand. And sometimes programming has some limitations and there's different reasons for making different choices. So I'd like to thank everybody for being part of today's show. First, Mike Tomei, thanks for being here today. Can you tell us how we can get in touch with you and learn more about your company?
Yeah, so my website is tomeiav.com. It's TOMEIAV.com. And people can always find me on LinkedIn if you want to chat. I love talking shop with people.
Great. And your company is Tomei AV Consulting.
Yes, correct.
Dave Hatz from AVI Systems, thanks for being here today. How can people reach you and learn more about AVI?
So avisystems.com gets you everything about AVI. We just shameless plug, we happen to have a new website banner with my special project thing I've been spending my last 3 years on, AVI Insights. So check that out. We got some cool information and videos there. If you want to reach me, dave.hatz@avisystems.com. Or I cruise on the Twitters at Dave Hatz AVI. So thanks again for having me, Steve.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. And last but not least, Uncle Richie, Rich Fregosa from Fregosa Designs. How are you? And thanks for being here. How can people reach you and learn more about your company?
You can always find me on the Twitters at rfregosa. You can find me at Fregosa Design. You can find us here at AVNation, whether we're here with Steve over here at State of Control or Resi Week or any other shows we have, please. And always remember, Uncle Richie says to always simplicate and never over technicate. So that's going to be the new ones that we're just going to be pushing out the whole time.
I like it. How we spell those is a different.
How we spell those
story.
is going to be up for discussion.
That's right. So as Rich said, please visit the website avnation.tv to learn more about this show and other shows. Resi Week and AV Week are the weeklies. EdTech, one that Mike appears on frequently, is another great show. And then those in the AV and IT world, there's a Connected show, and then in the IT AV show are other great insights. My name is Steve Greenblatt. I've been your host. You can reach me at Steve Greenblatt on most social media platforms. So you can also reach my company, Control Concepts, at controlconcepts.net. We're offering some education opportunities and doing a class on the program versus configured solutions. So check that out and let me know if you want to learn more about it. It's actually an AVIXA CTS renewal approved class. So one thing I'd like to ask too is if the audience could leave us some feedback, either check out the website, put a comment in the comment section, or put a rating for us on iTunes. We'd love to hear from you. Otherwise, we'll see you soon, and that's it for today for State of Control.